There we go. All right.
Joining us here on the program, WJXT Channel 4 up there in Jacksonville. Appreciate you joining me today, man. How are things?
Hey, it's been quiet. Nothing's going on, right? Yeah, appreciate you having me on. Yeah, it's a busy time for the Jaguars. Football season wrapped up, a lot of disappointment, but with that comes change.
Yeah, you got that right, man. And it's funny, I was just talking to my buddy Greg Allman from Fox Sports about all things Bucks about an hour ago, and we were talking about Byron Leftwich. And of course, you guys know, from his career there and the flirting of him possibly being the coach there. And then we see today that he's going to get interviewed for the New England Patriots job after being out of football for 2 years. What do you remember about that whole situation? Because down here, Byron, and it's a guy that a lot of people liked, but the tenure ended really weird down in the Bay Area because he kept telling us like, oh, this isn't fantasy football. And it was just like, no, Byron, we're saying you're struggling running the football. You're 32nd in the league. This isn't an opinion. This is fact. We actually really like you, but he was just very combative. It was very strange. And then, he wanted to go to Notre Dame and they're like, nah, we're good. We're chilling. Right. What do you remember from that whole thing? Because it's kind of weird that I mentioned Byron Leftwich and now today he's kind of back in the news.
Yeah, he's right back at it. I mean, it was I guess that was the cycle where they ended up hiring Doug Pederson, and that was a long coaching cycle. I mean, there were interviews here. The Jaguars were connected to this guy. I mean, he was connected to Eberflus, and then Eberflus got a job. And I mean, that was another cycle where they kept general manager Trent Baalke on, and the reports were that some candidates didn't want to work with Trent. Byron Leftwich was one of the guys that got really close to the job. There were even people here in Jacksonville that were reporting that he had actually agreed to it, but that never quite happened. He never was quite offered the job. And he was a finalist for the position. If it wasn't Doug, it probably would have been Byron. Right. And a lot of fans were excited about that. Obviously, I mean, Byron Leftwich was a quarterback for the Jaguars. He had helped Tampa Bay get to the Super Bowl. There was excitement there to bring him back to see if he could be the guy to fix the Jags, get Trevor Lawrence on the right path and get everything smoothed out here. It didn't quite work out, and then he kind of disappeared. And then now he pops up and he's getting the head coaching interview. He did the story with The Athletic, I think it was. Mm-hmm. So, he said he wanted to get back into coaching, and good for him that he's getting back on the right track, getting back on the horse. We'll see if he can land on somebody's staff next year so in some capacity. Look, I think he's definitely a good coach. I know fans here were excited about the opportunity to maybe add him as the head coach at the time. But we'll see what happens. That was a wild cycle, man. There was like 2 or 3 day period where people were like, "Oh no, it's happening! It is." Mm-hmm. So no, it's not.
Yeah, it's imminent. I swear it's happening. My buddy told me he's the janitor at the building. No, not quite. It's a wait and see approach. I think a lot of people were surprised, at the way it didn't work out. And I know a lot of it had to do with Trevor, being banged up and being injured. But, just listening from afar, because, I'm in a lot of these press conferences for all the sports and just listening to Doug Pederson. And it was just sometimes it's awkward, man. And I've been there when it's been awkward, right? I was there at the Jameis. You better check your sheet. I'm balling, right? I was like, oh, Jameis, I've been defending you for 5 years. Please don't say that. But it seemed weird, Jamal, listening to Doug. I mean, this is a Super Bowl winning coach, and it was just like a weird dynamic, and things like that usually don't work out. He just seemed so miserable, for lack of a better term. Where did it really, outside of just, all right, Trevor wasn't healthy, but where did it go wrong for Doug in his tenure there?
Look, I don't know if Doug was miserable as much as he was frustrated. Oh, okay. There was definitely frustrations there with the way things were happening, the way some of the stuff was going on out on the field. He couldn't figure out or understand why some of the mistakes that we would see out on the field kept happening. For sake of example, the blown coverages in the secondary, they've plagued his tenure. They were all last year. He fires the defensive coaching staff, guts it, brings in a whole new defensive coordinator, new staff. They're doing extra walkthroughs. They're doing extra work on the side to try and make sure that these mistakes don't show up. But then somehow, game day, crunch time, do or die, and then you've got a guy running wide open down the field for the game-winning touchdown for the other team. He was frustrated. He was frustrated with the fact that the culture kind of hadn't turned the way he wanted it to. He was frustrated that, kind of every time something went wrong, sometimes the locker room or the players had the, here we go again. And he's like,
Right.
whoa, wait a minute. We were just winning these games just a minute ago. There was definitely some frustration there. So, and I understand it because some of that stuff, like, it sounds like they were doing the work. I mean, the players said, we practice hard. The players said that all the time. We practice hard. We're one of the hardest practicing teams. Okay, then where's the problem?
Right.
There's a problem somewhere because it's not showing up. So where's the problem? Some of it, I think, is Doug is just insanely loyal, and he was loyal to his playbook. So when people were throwing grief at his offensive coordinator, Press Taylor, he would defend Press. And I don't think that he understood that it was more or less that people were throwing angst toward the way the offense was in general, which is his offense, so he was defending Press, saying, nah, Press is doing fine, where everybody's like, but look at these other offenses and look at the innovative things they're doing on the field. Why aren't you doing those same things or anything in that same vein? So there was definitely a loyalty factor there. I think there was a frustration level. I think some of it's just some of the pieces that were put together are kind of a hodgepodge. And I think that's why fans were so aggravated with Trent Baalke being retained, because he's the guy who built the roster. So then when you look at this team and you're like, well, there's talent, but like, how much upper level elite talent is there? And this is a players' league. The teams with the best players win games. Yeah. And right now, the Jaguars roster, while it's better than it was, it's still not where they think it is or where they thought it was.
Do you think the success in that first year gave Doug like a false sense of like, hey, no, this can work? Because, you know, like sometimes if it's bad from the start, you're like, all right, I got to change this. Maybe I take a look in the mirror. But, you know, sometimes I think coaches, when they only last like 3 years in a place, so see with the Giants, right? With the Giants, that first year, Brian Daboll, coach of the year. And then it's just like, we can do this with Daniel Jones. And then he gets there like, maybe we can't do it with Daniel Jones. I think maybe it's hard because you don't want to lose your identity, right? Because that's what got you a head coaching job in the first place. But sometimes I think maybe coaches a little bit, maybe of a false sense of security of like, hey, instead of looking at that 1 year, maybe you need to be a little bit more open-minded and changing a little bit.
I think their process was flawed, to be honest. So that first year, that was a veteran-heavy team. They had guys like Marvin Jones at wide receiver. They had a lot of guys in places, and they have this success. They make the run late in the year, go into the playoffs. It's great. They basically stand pat. They make no changes to the roster, like addition-wise. But they do make some subtractions, but they say, oh, we're going to be a draft and develop team. So then last year they go in, and they start the run, 8-3, but then injuries, attrition happens, and you really hadn't made many additions to the roster. So you find out that behind those starters, there was this like layer of thin where of inexperience that couldn't step up, that wasn't ready to rise to that moment, falls off the cliff. And then this year, there's a lot of young players that they because they want to be this draft and develop team that are getting more opportunities and playing a lot. I mean, this year's rookie class was playing, you know, through the roof snaps. And when you play young players, mistakes happen. They're getting adjusted to the NFL. I mean, Brian Thomas Jr. was lighting the league on fire late in the season, but even him, it took a little bit of an adjustment period to kind of ramp him up and get there. Rookie Jarian Jones was playing fantastic late in the year. Mason Smith playing fantastic late in the year, but both of them had to take some lumps early in the season. So I think their plan was a little flawed. Like, think about it this way. Let's just flip it. If in year one they win 4 games, everybody's like, well, that's one more than last year. It's not the end of the world. They're building. And then they win 9 games the year after that and 9 games the year after that. We're talking about year 4 under Doug Pederson. He's not fired. We're going into another one. He did it back. They did it backwards. He came in, and instead of giving those young players really a chance to play and grow immediately, then they kind of leaned on the veterans they had, added some other veteran pieces, and then said, oh, we forgot. We want to be a draft and develop team, and started moving on from veteran players and pushing in these inexperienced young players. And all of a sudden, but that's when the expectations are growing, because you're going into year 3. There's an expectation here. So I think they should have, if they wanted to be that, they should have started that earlier and then start adding the veteran pieces that you need to fill in the blanks from the young players that you didn't have. Because, like I said, if you flip it backwards and you say 4 wins, 9 wins, 9 wins, we're talking about year 4.
What do you think the overall opinion is of these 3 guys there in Jacksonville? Shahid Khan, Trent Baalke, Trevor Lawrence.
In Jacksonville?
Yes, sir.
Shahid Khan, my opinion, I think he's a good owner. Fans are very hard on him because they haven't had winning, which I understand, and that is the ultimate metric for an owner is, do you win games? Do you win championships? And he hasn't. But my explanation, as always, is Shahid Khan is a hands-off owner, but people complain about the hands-on micromanaging owners. But he's a hands-off owner that gives his people all the resources they need or ask for. If they say, hey, we need money to sign this guy, he says, write the check. Hey, we need a new practice facility, write the check. Hey, we need a new stadium. Okay, Jacksonville, write the check. Like he's not the no guy. He's the what do you need? Write the check. Right. So he's given his people all the funds to attain the goal. He's just trusting the wrong people. So I don't think that's a bad owner. I think that's a guy who's just made some mistakes, and he just needs the right person in his corner. Trent Baalke, they hate him. Trent Baalke might be the most hated general manager in the NFL, and I don't know if it's close. I mean, fans have shown up at the stadium dressed as clowns to get rid of the dude. They've shown up. They flew a banner over the stadium that said "Fire Baalke." I mean, it would have been an easier sell to the fan base if they said they were keeping Doug Pederson and firing Trent Baalke than firing Doug Pederson and keeping Trent Baalke. They're going to have a tough time getting people to believe that. They better nail the head coaching hire because people are tired. They've seen what they needed to see from Trent. Trent has a track record that goes back to San Francisco, and it's going to be tough to sell people that, this time Trent's going to get it right. That one's going to be a tough sell. As far as Trevor Lawrence, I know there's still a high expectation, definitely a high belief. But to whom much is given, much is expected. It's time. He's gotten the contract. He has got to take a huge step forward in their expectations. There's been this glitz and glimmer around him, an unquestionable fathom about, Trevor's elite that has been here and around that team for a long time. That's starting to kind of step back a little bit because there are more and more questions. It's been real easy last season to point the finger and say, well, Doug, why'd you do this when there was a mistake that Trevor made on the field? And some of them were fair to blame on the coach. And some of them are like, well, Trevor shouldn't have thrown the ball there. That was on the quarterback. So I think it's time that we got to see him take a step. He's been good, and we've seen the light. Like I always, when I talk about Trevor, I talk about it like a light switch. I've seen it flicker, but we've never seen it stay on for a whole season. I mean, that run in 22, Trevor was fantastic. He was elite down the stretch, but he's got to flip the light switch on, and he's got to do it for a whole year, and that's what people got to see at this point.
Yeah, and I know he wasn't 100% when he was here against the Bucs last year, but it was just
that wasn't
the same guy. And I was just like, people were saying, "Well, he's not good, but he's not as good as we thought." I'm like, I don't know if I'm judging him on that performance.
He was playing through that whole last year, the 8-3 run. He was banged up. If they could do it again, I think they would bench Trevor for a couple of weeks and tell him to recover and try and get healthy and say, okay, now you're healthy. The shoulder isn't a problem. I mean, that Tampa game, the shoulder was a problem. He had the concussion. He had a knee problem. I mean, he was banged up that whole last stretch. I mean, that whole month of December, it was a new injury each week because he was just gutting it out. Like, nobody's going to say Trevor's not tough. But I think the coaching staff, I think Trevor, I think they handled his injury this year differently because of what they learned from last year of, all right, look, we know you'll play through it. We got it. Nobody's questioning your toughness. But last year, if we'd have sat you down for a week or two and said, Trevor, go get healthy, by the end of the season, we could have got that one win and been in the playoffs. But we didn't because we let you gut it through. And maybe that was a mistake on their part. I think that, there's a lot that we kind of got to throw out for Trevor. And that's the unfair part with, like, as we try and judge him. His first year under Urban Meyer was I mean, you flushed that year. You can't even count it. So essentially, Doug walked in year one as a rookie with Trevor, first time teaching him about the NFL. All right, great. The light comes on at the end of that season, and he's rolling. Boom. Goes into year 2 under Doug Pederson, which is technically year 3 for Trevor, but really his second year.
Mm-hmm.
And you only really got a half a season with him because the second half of the season, he was so banged up dealing with the concussion, the shoulder, other injuries, just banged up that you're like, well, how much can you really judge him on this? I mean, that shoulder strain probably eventually it did sit him down for a week, but they probably shouldn't have played in the Tampa game probably.
Mm-hmm.
And then this year where you had him for a little bit, stuff was just kind of going wrong. And then you end up losing half of this year because of the shoulder injury. And then he kind of came back and tried to play through the shoulder injury and got hurt again.
So a lot of Mac Jones this year.
Yeah, saw a lot of Mac Jones this year. So, I mean, there's so much that we're like that he's going into this next season, but we've missed so much like football that you can really hold him accountable for because, I mean, he played that full season as a rookie under Urban Meyer, but, I mean, I don't know anybody that could have walked into that situation and been successful.
Nobody's faulting him for whatever the hell happened there, man. That was
no.
I mentioned it today. I'm like, what the hell, man? Like that's you write that year off for everybody. You know, you're like, you shouldn't. He's supposed to be the adult in the room, right? Like it's like, oh man, geez. Thanks, Urban. Appreciate it. Go back to doing what you're doing. Big Fox, high noon, Fox. Don't do your thing. Go out in the Big Ten somewhere. What was to make of the phone? Was it a Zoom call where Shahid Khan was talking about Trent Baalke can possibly like I saw a little snippet of it. I'm like, did he really say that the coach could come in here and possibly kind of fire the GM? Like what the hell is going on with that?
So the way Shahid works is Shahid really, and he started this with Urban, he really wants to build this as a coach-centric like dynamic. He wants the head coach to be the CEO, the fundamental, like the core piece of this thing. So he's kind of changed the workflow to where, like a lot of places, the coach reports to the general manager. Here, the GM reports directly to Shahid Khan, and the head coach reports directly to Shahid Khan. So he wants it to be this coach-centric dynamic to where it's, what do you need? What do you want? And, I mean, again, he's a guy, write the check. Urban Meyer came in, we need practice facility. All of a sudden, they were breaking ground on a practice facility. I mean, he was getting stuff. Write the check, get it done. So he said that. He said the same thing the last time, though, when they were doing the head coaching search, and ultimately it ended up being Doug Pederson. He said the same exact thing, that if a head coach came in and said they wanted their own general manager, that he'd say, convince me. Tell me why I need to hire your guy and get rid of my guy and convince me. And not that he would say no, but you got to sell him on it. Now, no one was able to do that last go around. We'll see what ultimately happens this go around. I mean, look, I don't know how hard that convincing is going to be. Trent Baalke is clearly a person that Shahid Khan trusts. Right. So it would have to be a coach that Shahid says, I've got to get this guy. This is the can't miss, got to have him, big fish that he's going to trust and say, all right, well, Trent, you got to go because this guy wants to bring in his guy. And I'd almost guarantee his guy couldn't be a first-time GM. It would have to be somebody that, like, Shahid and say, oh, that's a good track record too.
Right.
So I think that's going to be a tough sell. But, I mean, it's a similar thing to what he said last time, and it didn't materialize.
That's kind of crazy. He thinks that it's going to work kind of going backwards from every other professional sports franchise in sports. Like, yeah, just go that way. Ideally, if you had your pick, who would you want as the next head coach of the Jags?
Look, I'd be run out of town if I said anybody but Ben Johnson. So they'd have torches and pitchforks looking for me. Look, Ben Johnson's the big fish this year. Yeah. Everybody wants him. Any team that that has an opening is going to want that guy because he's the offensive mastermind, whiz kid from Detroit. Only one team can get him, and I think the thing that worried a lot of people with Trent Baalke sticking around was, is Trent going to work? Or is Ben going to want to work with Trent? I don't know. The good thing is that Ben has turned down other jobs. I think that the Jaguars job is more attractive than some of the other jobs on the market. I would put Ben at the top. I like Aaron Glenn a lot as a kind of guy that would come in and he'd be a culture setter because the Jaguars need to set the culture moving forward. So I wouldn't hate either one of the Detroit coordinators. And I'm a big Joe Brady guy too, over there in Buffalo. So I wouldn't hate that either. But I know a lot of people down here, like the guy in Tampa, Liam
Hey, man,
Coen.
you back off, Jamal. Back off, right? Don't be messing with my guy, Liam Coen, all right?
Hey, I'm just telling you that's what Jags Twitter wants. They're like, man, tell him it's a short drive and he can come right on up to Jacksonville.
It's funny how that goes because everybody wanted Zach Robinson last year for the Bucs after Dave Canales went to the Carolina Panthers. Like, he went to the Falcons. Oh, that's so terrible. Well, Liam Coen did a much better job than Zach Robinson this year. Yeah. So sometimes it's not always, I always say this, Tristan Wirfs was the 4th offensive lineman taken, and he's probably the best left tackle in football now. So sometimes it's not always who you get. It could be your 3rd or 4th option. Does the wrestling play into, I'm a big wrestling fan. Does the AEW stuff does that affect anybody's view of the franchise at all? Or is it just like, that's Tony's thing. He does it there. It kind of, he wears the neck brace during the draft kind of thing, but it's, what kind of, does that play into the whole scenario?
It shouldn't affect the way people look at it at all. I mean, that's Tony Khan's thing. That is his business. He runs it. And yeah, they do some of the stuff over at Daly's place. They've been in the stadium. They've had Jackson DeVille on. I mean, when Urban Meyer was the coach, he popped up. Like
him and Charlie Strong.
And Charlie Strong pulling out the laptop. Like I don't think that should impact anybody's view of anything. I think Tony does a good job of running that wrestling program. And to be honest, Tony Khan does a lot of stuff for Jaguars, analytics wise, that he gets some credit for sometimes, but I don't think widely people know. I mean, after the draft, Tony goes through and combs through, and every year there's a couple of Tony's guys that are undrafted free agents that they bring in. And a lot of times they stick around. I mean, Elijah Cooks was one of Tony's guys from a couple of years ago. He made the roster as a rookie. He was on the practice squad this year, and played some meaningful football for the Jaguars. I mean, he's a guy who played in the Sweet 16 at one point, playing basketball in college before he kind of went full football. So, I mean, Tony's found some guys doing that for the Jaguars football-wise. So, yeah, look, let AEW do its thing, and as long as Tony can keep trying to uncover some undrafted gems and some gems for the team, I don't see it. Don't bother me none,
Yeah, I'm with you, man.
It works.
I think it's a lot of fun, and hell, they got the soccer team too, Fulham over there. So I mean, they're they got a lot on the Khan family, man. They got a lot on their plate, but you got that much money, man. You got a lot of room for food, Jamal St, Cyr, WJXT, Channel 4 up there in Jacksonville. Keep up the great work, man. I appreciate your time today and look forward to talking to you. And then down the road, maybe the Jags will have a head coach by then, and who the heck knows who it's going to be, but it's going to be fun watching the process. I appreciate it, man. Have a great rest of your week.
Hey, appreciate you having me on. See you, Jay.
All right, pal.